Hello and welcome to the Informed Animal Ally presented by the Vancouver Humane Society. This is the Animal Ethics Podcast where we share the ins and outs of topics like cruelty, legislation, and advocacy here in BC and across Canada. Hello, this is Chantal Archambault, the Communications Director at the Vancouver Humane Society. I'm joining you briefly today to share a recent interview from the early edition with Stephen Quinn on CBC Radio. In this interview, the VHS's campaign director, Emily Pickett, discusses the tragic life and death of Jenga the giraffe, who died at the Greater Vancouver Zoo on October 23rd, as well as ongoing welfare concerns at the zoo. This interview has been shared with permission.
It is 13 minutes after 8 o'clock on the early edition. Well, another animal has died at the Greater Vancouver Zoo, this time an 8-year-old giraffe called Jenga. Now, the zoo called him an iconic member of the Greater Vancouver Zoo family. According to the zoo, Jenga was found dead in his barn stall on Wednesday afternoon. Jenga is one of 4 young giraffes to die at the facility since 2006. And for more on this, we're joined by Emily Pickett. She's the campaign director for the Vancouver Humane Society. Good morning to you, Emily.
Good morning.
We don't know all of the details yet. The zoo says it is still awaiting the results of a necropsy, but what has been your reaction to this news? This was an 8-year-old giraffe.
Well, we at the Vancouver Humane Society are deeply saddened to learn of the death of yet another animal at the Greater Vancouver Zoo, and certainly we were surprised and saddened. The giraffe, Jenga, was only 8 years old when he died, which is really a fraction of the lifespan for giraffes in the wild, where they can live for up to 25 years.
Right. And tell me more about Jenga's life in the zoo, or I guess the lives of giraffes generally there, because this is one of 4 now young giraffes to die at that facility since 2006.
Yeah, well, giraffes are very sensitive animals that we know do not fare well in captivity. In fact, they can have shorter lifespans than their wild counterparts. And the life of Jenga was very different than the life of a wild giraffe. And I think that really points out the concerns that we at the Humane Society have. In the wild, giraffes live in large herds. They have a large home range. Their natural habitat is typically arid and dry. They're browsing animals that are adapted to foraging and feeding predominantly on leaves and stems of trees and shrubs. But at the Greater Vancouver Zoo, Jenga lived a very different life. He lived with only a couple of other giraffes in a pretty small and barren enclosure with little to no opportunity to engage in many of those natural behaviors, and certainly in a very different climate than what his wild counterparts would be in.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that, warm, arid climate, I mean, it's exactly the opposite here, especially through the wintertime, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a big problem for giraffes too. They struggle as a species to regulate their body temperatures. And so the colder winter months can be a real problem for them in these environments.
Tell me about the Vancouver Humane Society and the reports that you have commissioned by Zoo Check. I guess the last one would have been in 2019. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the Vancouver Humane Society has had longstanding concerns around the welfare and conditions of animals at the Greater Vancouver Zoo. And we've partnered with Zoo Check we've commissioned reports by them as experts in this area for a number of years now. I think our first report on the Vancouver Zoo was back in 1997. And the most recent one, as you mentioned, was in 2019. And it found a number of key issues. Overall, a lot of the issues kind of zoo-wide were about a lack of environmental and behavioral enrichment for the animals, which we know is very important for wild animals. They need to engage in these natural behaviors, as well as inappropriate social housing, for social animals, and indoor enclosures that were really basic and barren, as well as similar to the water issues, issues with groundwater and water logging of their enclosures. Specifically for the giraffes, our 2019 report found similar issues as well.
We the zoo does it is an accredited zoo, is it not?
It is, yes, through CASA, it is accredited.
Okay, and the I mean, we've seen other animals there. It's not just giraffes. Obviously, there was Chia the wolf 2 years ago. There was an emaciated moose as well. We hear a lot about these animal deaths, these sort of high profile animal deaths at the zoo. Is the Greater Vancouver Zoo does it? I mean, how does it compare to other zoos in the country when it comes to animal welfare?
Well, I think just kind of going right back to your point about the CASA accreditation, a
Yeah,
concern is that CASA is really a private industry association of
right.
zoos and aquariums. They represent their members, and the accreditation is really kind of the zoos and aquariums accrediting themselves.
Hmm.
So that's a bit problematic for us. It certainly sounds good on the surface, but it isn't necessarily meaning that it's not an indicator of best practices or high animal welfare standards. So that's a concern for us certainly, and doesn't necessarily mean that the animals are doing well. And as you mentioned, the number of deaths and incidents, including in recent years, we think really illustrates the issues.
And Emily, is the Humane Society calling for any particular action right now as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've been asking the zoo for many years to take action on its own. And now we obviously have not seen the changes we would like to see over the number of years and the number of reports that we've drafted and shared with them. So we are calling on certainly still the zoo to do more, but also urging the BC government to do more.
Hmm.
They are responsible for issuing the permits to the zoo to be able to keep these animals. So what we would like to see is the zoo stop keeping exotic animals entirely. As illustrated, they're not appropriate for
Hmm.
these conditions and these environments. And really to shift to a sanctuary model that where they can focus on rescue, rehab, and release of native species from BC, and to provide sanctuary for those animals that can't be released.
Emily, thank you for the time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
The Informed Animal Ally is a podcast by the Vancouver Humane Society. If you found this episode helpful, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more supporters of animals. To support this project and other initiatives to build a kinder world for animals, you can make a donation at vancouverhumane.ca. You can also follow the Vancouver Humane Society on Facebook at Vancouver Humane Society, Instagram at Vancouver Humane, or Twitter at VanHumane. The music in this episode is the song Jonah's Message for New York by Dr. Turtle, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International Public License. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being an animal ally.